Gospel of John, chapter 15, the Lord talks at length about abiding. Abide in my love as I abide in my Father's love. Abide in my love as I abide in my Father's love. Now, when you hear that, you might think to yourself, well, gosh, that sounds like a snooze fest, right? The beginning of a long treatise on the nature of love, but there's actually kind of a lot to it. So a couple of things right at the bat. Firstly, you'll notice that it's very purposeful. The whole point of abiding in God's love is to share in His joy, to share in His joy and to live good and fruitful lives. But the second thing is the particular path to abiding in God's love. It's following His commandments. Again, no small detail. To go the way of Christian love is not to simply feel a certain way or to contemplate the nature of love. It's to live in that space of actively willing the good of the other as other in specific and concrete ways, grounded in reality. So given all that, I thought what I might do is talk about some aspect of that, some aspect of journeying with other people, loving people in specific and concrete ways, by talking about listening and accompaniments, practical tips as to how to listen better, if you will. So the first thing that kind of comes to mind is to actually be interested in other people. To actually be interested in other people, as opposed to focusing on appearances. A lot of times we do the latter. We focus on appearances, we focus on technique. I want to appear that I'm listening. I want to appear that I care, and so I focus on things like eye contact, or body language, or active listening. We often forget the philosophical principle, doing flows from being. So I focus on being a good tree. I can't help but produce good fruits. Similar thing here. If I actually care about the person I'm listening to, the body language, the eye contact, the active listening takes care of itself. The example that comes to mind is actually from a good friend of mine. Basically what he said to me was, Eric, one of my pet peeves is when people say, I hate pineapple on pizza. Whereas in reality, they probably love something really cool, like putting chips in bottles. Now, when you hear that, you might think, well, that's kind of a weird statement, but actually it's a really on-point commentary on the human condition. Because if you break it down, that particular statement is not about pineapple, it's not about pizza, it's not even about chips. It's about risk. It's about bravery in conversation and relationships. I'm afraid of putting myself out there. And so I pretend that I'm interested in things I really don't care about. I'm the guy who hates pineapple on pizza. Whereas in reality, I'm afraid of putting myself out there. Speaking from this place of passion, some variation of ships and bottles. If you're aware that people are living in tension and are not really brave and are living in a space of meaningless small talk, you can actually guide the conversation as you're listening to the other, to encourage the other person to be brave, to take risks. Talk about things you actually care about. Talk about things from your place of passion. Let me share in your joys. Let me share in your sorrows because I'm interested in you and I love you. So focus on actually being interested in the other person. The other thing that comes to mind, to allow your listening to inform your thought process and therefore what you ultimately say. A couple examples come to mind. So I remember once talking to a priest friend of mine who said that in the early going, after he was newly ordained, he was so worried about saying the right thing in the sacrament of confession. And he remembers one particular time where he was hearing someone's confession. And in retrospect, he wasn't paying attention. And the penitent was confessing his or her sins, and all of a sudden, the penitent stopped talking, and the priest forgot everything the person just said. And he realized in retrospect what I should have done was simply pay attention. Just listen. Don't worry about talking. Don't worry about what you're going to say. When the time comes, trust that God will give you the words to say. Kenneth Burke, this literary theorist, he talks about this using a clever analogy. This analogy is used primarily for academic discourse to illustrate that particular dynamic, but it applies here too. So he says, imagine you arrive late at a cocktail party. The prudent thing to do is to not speak right away, because you're late. So listen to what people are saying. What are people saying at this cocktail party? How does that compare and contrast to what I know and what I think I know? And then, when the time is right, you speak. And if you're respectful of the process, your contribution to the conversation actually elevates the overall conversation because you've allowed your listening to inform your thought process and ultimately your speech. This last point is kind of subtle, but I think you'll appreciate this. This notion that listening is not a function of time. It's not a task to be done, but it's a matter of relationship. So again, listening is not a matter of time, it's not a task to be simply done. It's a function or a manifestation of relationship. So, again, a couple examples come to mind. So there's this organizational body within the Archdiocese of Toronto called the Council of Priests. Their whole purpose is to advise the Archbishop on local matters. And they would talk about this thing, listening and accompaniment. And one priest on this council said, you know what, gosh, as priests, especially as pastors, we're really busy. Like, I would love to spend time with people and accompany them, but maybe we should delegate this task to other people. Now, fortunately, one of the regional bishops kind of spoke up and said, well, no, you got to recognize when it comes to listening, when it comes to accompaniment, again, it's not a function of time. It's not a task to be done, but it's a matter of relationship and encounter. It's a way of being, it's a state of mind. If you focus on that, listening and accompaniment as encounter, you can have a moment which is brief or long, but it's still an encounter because it's all about bringing meaning to this thing. A meaningful encounter grounded in a relationship. I'll end with one final example. So back in the day, I was having dinner with this beautiful lady who was a professional model. Beautiful, gorgeous. It's essential to the story. The reason why we're introduced is because we had a mutual friend who heard that she was thinking about being a lawyer. He knew that I was a lawyer, so hey, maybe you can give her career advice or something. So we're having dinner. And early on in the conversation, I asked her a question. So, why do you want to be a lawyer? And it was interesting. She didn't talk about law. She didn't talk about justice. She talked about this particular episode from her past. So what she said was that back in the day, I was working reception, and I did something for someone. And that someone basically gave me a compliment and said, wow, you're really clever. Maybe you should be a lawyer. And I thought, I said to her, I don't think you really want to be a lawyer. I think you just want to be affirmed for something other than your physical beauty. And she felt really emotional, and she wanted to date me. And I was like, no. I thought that'd be a bad idea, partially because I was thinking what the priest said at that point, but also, in reality, we had nothing in common. But I love that example, right? Because it's interesting, but depending on how you look at it, it's kind of sad. I just asked her a question, and I listened to the answer. I expressed interest in this person as an individual, and all of a sudden she thinks I'm her potential soulmate. That's not good. I don't know how to put it. So many people out there are, lonely doesn't even begin to capture it. I don't feel seen, I don't feel known, I don't feel loved, I don't feel heard, I don't feel listened to. I'm afraid of putting myself out there because of how I'm constantly received by the world. Now, if you're mindful of that, if you're mindful of the fact that this happens all the time, obviously the challenge is to listen. To not just listen, but to listen better and to listen with intention. You gotta go back to this notion that listening is not a function of time. It's not a task to be accomplished, but it's a matter of journeying with the other person. I create space in my heart for the other person. Be brave. Have courage. Speak about things that are actually in your heart. Talk about things you actually care about. Speak from your place of passion. Let me share in your joys. Let me share in your sorrows because I'm interested in you and I love you as a person.